Vera and I are good to go whenever you guys are. If you want to do like introductions or something, that's totally fine.
Yeah, can we have 2 minutes? We're having some tech stuff we just need to sort out.
Yeah, you're good.
Thank you.
In the meantime, for the judges, I'm Ada Hayes. I'm first speaker from Durham, and my pronouns are she, her, and we're speaking for second on the app.
I'm Veer Prakash for the AF. I'm the second speaker, the P in Durham HP, and my pronouns are he, him.
I'm Claire from Marist. I'm the second speaker. My pronouns are she, her, and this is Josh. He's the first speaker for Marist, and his pronouns are she or he, him.
Okay, we're good. Sorry about that. Is everybody ready?
Yep.
Okay, sounds good. And it's going to be a one-off in case. I'll start talking my first word. Interpretation they violate. Debaters competing in varsity divisions at TOC bid tournaments must disclose all previously read evidence in cases on the 2021-2022 NDCA Public Forum Wiki following the debate in which it was read. Disclosures voted because 1. It increases advanced strategical thinking. Disclosure allows in-depth and nuanced discussions that invite third and fourth lines of testing of arguments. Pre-round discussions of strategy are a form of convergent thinking, which is better for student learning. Kamiri argues that convergent teaching is more effective. Divergent thinking tasks require participants to generate as many target-related responses as possible. Convergent thinking requires focusing on one possible response per item. Convergent teaching method based on the data gained and other findings is more effective. Second, it decreases the inequity gap. CAMS, prep groups, and private coaching is inevitable, which provides certain groups unique advantages to intel gathering. Disclosure sets a baseline that everyone in a tournament has the same access to information regardless of extracurricular behavior. Setting good norms outweighs. There is a prior question to the content of arguments decided on competing interpretations. The impacts above have already been triggered. Drop the team to discourage the practice. There are no reverse voting issues because you don't win for proving you are educational. They must answer this in the next speech. 1, it's reciprocal, and 2, it prevents a time skew. We negate our sole contention is social capital. Build Back Better hangs on by a thread, but Biden will salvage it. Despite Manchin's refusal, Kapur wrote at the end of December, Biden's legacy could turn on this moment. The BBB hangs by a thread. Manchin sent into the White House in a tailspin by announcing his opposition. Biden faces his most consequential test yet to restructure the package in a way that satisfies Manchin. While this is a hiccup, there is no better negotiator than Biden, and Manchin is getting on board. The coming weeks offer the right momentum. Lifted Road in 2022, the coming weeks can provide much-needed momentum. Tensions seem to have cooled. Biden has a habit of pulling legislative rabbits out of his hat. The State of the Union will adjust expectations. The coming week will prove critical for Biden with a renewed drive to pass stalled legislation, but full legalization would cost political capital. Scott argues national leaders don't want to spend the political capital in publicly supporting legalization. Public opinion is only now coming around in favor of ending prohibition. It's still a big political risk, and political capital is key to getting Manchin. Varsity argues Biden and Manchin continue to discuss the bill following Manchin's seemingly definitive rejection. The president is not by any means done fighting and has confidence. Biden has a habit of pulling legislative rabbits out of his hat. Biden's political capital is strong enough now to overcome Manchin anger. Godfrey explained in 2021, the fact that every single frontliner came out was like, no, we're not doing this tells you something. There is political necessity that will prevail upon Joe Manchin. He's going to come back to the table after the holidays, and we're going to get something done. Passing Build Back Better is critical to advancing social justice, has 2 impacts. First, it lifts folks out of poverty. Tristy argues in 2021, BBB drive a more equitable recovery by making investment in children, workers, and healthcare that will enable more people to reach their potential and share in the nation's growth. The legislation would cut cut child poverty, narrow long-standing racial disparities in child poverty rates, and help more children reach their full potential, extending the expansion of the child tax credit. Second, the initiative funds HBCUs. Broadly funds in 2021, BBB will increase the maximum Pell Grant by $550 for more than 5 million students enrolled. The BBB framework will benefit HBCUs that have been historically underfunded, yet have persisted in providing African American students with the best mechanism. The BBB will make historic investments in HBCUs, tribal colleges, and universities, and HBCUs most effective at increasing wages for marginalized groups. Greece argues in 2021, over a 16-year period, their wages had overtaken those of non-HBCU attendees. They actually earned about 6% more. HBCUs are particularly effective in matriculating Black males from relatively poor areas with disadvantaged backgrounds. Reid indicates also that the wages of African American graduates of HBCUs are 38% higher than those who graduated from other types of colleges. Thus, you should negate.
Can we just get like a case doc or something?
Yeah, I'll send it right now.
Also, we'll take prep starting when we get that.
Both the show and the case have been sent.
Perfect. We will start prep as soon as we receive those.
Is Vera on the email chain?
Oh, never mind. I just got it. Okay. I will start prep now.
Okay. Vera, do you know how long that was?
That was 145.
Okay. Is everybody ready? Perfect. We affirm the biggest problem in this round is that they literally did not disclose this theory shell before this round started. Also, we're breaking news, so this case doesn't even violate the shell. Community norms support that you only have to disclose previously run arguments. This case has never been run before. Therefore, our counter interprets that disclosure is bad. the violation we meet, they don't. On standards, they didn't even disclose the shell on the wiki. They're not even helping to promote this broader educational impact that they claim is so important. And second, other schools go through wiki and prep out, so there's no real advantage to disclosing because private coaches do the same. Therefore, you're not gaining any advantage by disclosing your case. Contention 1 is cartel corruption. Cartels are very powerful in the status quo. Davidson 21 finds cartels control 35 to 40% of Mexican territory. Worse, a congressional report from October finds these illicit systems control the movement of most foreign illicit drugs trafficked into the United States, including heroin, fentanyl, cocaine, methamphetamine, and marijuana. This money isn't going anywhere good. As McGreal 11 says, the profit cartels get from the drugs are going right back into guns and violence. This profit that cartels sustain are used to get more drugs and more arms, creating a negative feedback loop. Fortunately, the legalization of illicit drugs solves this issue. Block 20 explains the only way to undermine drug cartels is to legalize these addictive substances. That's because Dower 18 tells legalization lets legitimate farmers enter the market and takes power away from cartels. Thus, Coin 17 concludes cartels will be impossible to maintain an illegal market. The impact is twofold. First is lives, as France 24 finds cartels have killed 300,000 people. Second is pandemics. Pedico 12 explains cartel power is the principal catalyst of Mexico's descent towards state failure. Thus, RAC 17 tells the real danger is that the country's government could collapse under the weight of brutal drug cartel violence and intractable corruption. Unfortunately, Graph 20 finds weak governments lack the capacity to mount and enforce effective public health campaigns. This is crucial as Carryman 18 finds the next pandemic will kill 1 billion people. Contention 2 is the war on drugs. Right now, the government targets minorities with minor drug violations. Coin 17 explains historically disadvantaged groups use similar amount of drugs as others, but are incarcerated, arrested, and raided by the police significantly more often. Indeed, HUDAC 20 finds African Americans are arrested for cannabis offenses 4 times more than their white counterparts. Even worse, Frederick 21 says these arrests can reverberate to all aspects of life and limiting career opportunities, access to housing, and educational prospects. Fortunately, legalization solves this issue in 2 key ways. The first is a direct arrest decrease. Lessman 12 explains legalization is the process of removing all legal prohibitions. Jager 21 explains legalization of cannabis in states established a clear pattern: 561 fewer arrests per 100,000 in Black communities and 195 fewer arrests for white communities. Historically, this argument is true as Newport 21 finds when Oregon legalized, drug convictions for Black and Native populations decreased 95%. The second is expungement. HUDAC 20 finds legalization laws lead to record expungement to reverse the low-level drug offenses many were incarcerated for. That's why Jager 21 finds federal legalization would contain automatic expulsion. The impact is twofold. The first is racial justice. Alexander 6 explained the legal system right now provides the white elite social class with benefit by removing the right to vote for 1 in 4 African Americans. This is crucial as Alexander continues, no one is representing the people of color behind bars because mass incarceration results in fewer legislative seats for communities of color. The second is poverty. Hannon 13 finds that without these changes in the legal system, largely brought about by policies criminalizing drugs, the poverty rate would have dropped 20%. Clark 21 furthers that poverty is the #1 cause of death, as about 875,000 people died in 1 year due to poverty. Thus, we affirm. Are you ready for cross?
Before cross, can I just have the counter-interp shell, please? That's it for me.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, we got it. So I am ready for cross. Can I have first question, please? Because I spoke first.
Yeah, of course. Let me pull up my timer.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. Why is disclosure uniquely bad?
We tell you the disclosure is uniquely bad because debate 1 helps people optimize quick thinking skills, and like 2, disclosure doesn't really do the things that you're like claiming it does, especially on your second like standard about like decreasing the inequity gap. Like it levels the private coaching field. Like it really doesn't, because like big schools will still like prep out the wiki in the same way that private coaching does. So it's not like private coaching is like uniquely worse than like big schools having access to the wiki. Like it doesn't really do anything.
Can I have a quick follow-up, please, to
Yeah,
that?
of course.
Right now, without disclosure, big schools, private coaches, and prep groups can still prep out cases, correct, through intel gathering?
I mean, yeah, I don't understand how that would support your argument, but sure. Can I ask you a
Okay.
question?
Sure.
Okay. Why haven't you disclosed this shell or your political capital argument on the wiki if you think it's so important?
Political capital is a new argument. I would argue that every other argument we've read throughout the tournament has been disclosed, and we did disclose the show. The only thing we added was that you have to respond in your next speech. That's because we're reading it first. Also, at the point in which that would be like a minor new addition.
Well, we
We
found
already
that before
disclosed.
round. We literally checked the wiki and the shell
Yeah.
was not there,
It-
and we have screenshots to
The
prove it.
interps that we read are on the wiki. Sorry, I don't. In mine, yeah, I probably shouldn't have said that. Spells crossed, but it's on the wiki.
Yeah.
It's under read me.
Okay, even if you go outside of this round, like your
Mhm.
previously disclosed racism K was also taken off the wiki. So I feel like there's multiple examples of you not following your own standard.
All of the arguments we read are still on the wiki, and you can like back check that if you want.
Not on the wiki. We literally have screenshots, but do you have a question?
I think I just asked one, maybe.
Okay, I'll have one
Yeah.
on your consent, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, so on this like cutting child poverty, can you explain to me like the link chain real quick between like not legalizing illicit substances and like suddenly taking children out of poverty? Because wouldn't that be happening in the status quo?
Yeah, well, what we're saying is that it is going to happen in the status quo because right now Biden is going to be able to convince Manchin to pass Build Back Better. The problem is the
So
moment
your
you affirm,
argument is entirely reliant on Biden like passing this plan?
sure, but we'll say he does have a good chance about it. We have the literature for that. But to answer the
Do you
second
have
part of
like
your,
the percentage chance? Like, are you going to quantify that?
obviously, I've never met Joe Manchin, so I can't give you an exact quantification on how likely he is. I would just say that our evidence does say that Biden has a very good chance of being able to convince Joe Biden or Manchin to pass it simply because of precedent and things he's done in the past and things Manchin has said. But what I can tell you for certain is that there is no world in which it gets passed if we legalize all drugs simply
So
because he
on
doesn't have the
historical
political capital.
precedents, on historical, oh, sorry.
That's time.
Yeah, sorry.
We're going to take prep. I'll let you know how much we use.
We have 217 left. It's going to start on theory and then just go down the AF. Is anybody not ready? Okay. Interpretation that they violate debaters competing in varsity divisions at TUC tournaments must disclose all previously read evidence in cases in 2020, 21, 2022 NDCA public forum wiki following the debate in which it was read. It's a voter for 2 reasons. The first is an increased advanced strategical thinking. Disclosure allows in-depth and nuanced arguments and invite third and fourth line testing of arguments. Pre-round discussion of strategy are a form of convergent thinking, which is better for student learning. Prefer this over like the argument that they make in cross, because we actually give you evidence. It's our Karami evidence. It's the educational study. It's always education's always going to outweigh because it's the only thing we take away from the round. Second of all, it decreases the inequity gap because camp prep groups and private coaching is inevitable, which provides certain unique groups advantages to intel gathering disclosure sets a baseline for everyone at tournaments, because in a world without disclosure, literally only the big schools would be able to get prep out, small schools wouldn't. It's decreasing the equity gap. We tell you it's a prior question, they concede this, which means that at the end of the day, substance isn't going to matter if theory is still a voter. In the round, it's what you look to first. Let's look to their arguments. First of all, they say that they're breaking new. First of all, this is not just about this specific round. This is about norm setting in debate. The fact that they do not even have a wiki page on their team proves that there's a harm being violated in the debate community and at this tournament, which is why it's still relevant. It doesn't matter that they're breaking new. Then they say that we didn't disclose our shells. They're there. I have no idea what they're saying about our affirmative. Everything that we've read is always on the wiki. It's been updated. It could have been a glitch, but I promise you that everything that we've read is on the wiki. That's really important. They say that it encourages prep outs. They literally give no warrant to this other than that teams just prep you out. That's really important because, first of all, prep outs are literally inevitable. As long as people are going to camp, as long as people are in prep groups, as long as people are on big schools with lots of friends on the circuit, prep outs are inevitable. The only difference is that in the world of disclosure, small schools and people who don't have a lot of resources or connections are now able to do those same prep outs. Also, prep outs are really good because, again, it advances strategical thinking. The only difference that happens is that the beginning of the debate is a lot more nuanced because you already know what people are reading, which is why when they say quick thinking in round, it doesn't in lacrosse, it doesn't really make a lot of sense because, first of all, prepared advanced strategical thinking is always going to outweigh impromptu thinking. Encourages claims without warrants, whereas our interpretation solves that argumentation flaw in pre-round discussions. We encourage pre-round to be about cross the X and final focus. That's going to be a better form of education, but also education strategy of execution of strategy and critical thinking is already solved back for in the second half of the debate. It solves literally all their offense. The only difference is by the time we get to the second half, the arguments are better and way more nuanced, which is why it's always going to outweigh even on a quick thinking. Again, they've conceded the fact that theory is a prior question. There's literally no need to look to substance at this point. They're already behind on the debate. Let's go to cartels. First off, they're not going to get any solvency. You can't check cartel revenue. They're diversified. They profit off of human trafficking, wealth of migrant smuggling. Is development rights that Colorado made history by being the first African American state where marijuana can be purchased for recreational purposes. Another variable must be taken into account. All Mexico's criminal groups, cartels have gone beyond trafficking illicit goods and are involved in prostitution, migrant smuggling, extortion, human trafficking, counterfeiting, and oil theft. That's really important. They're never going to solve it. Second of all, legalization increases profits long term and causes search word to spread to the United States. This attempts to quantifies that it's nonsensical to argue that these gangs will simply give up producing. Legalizing marijuana will only incentivize Mexican DTOs to grow more marijuana to feed the demand. In doing so, they will compete with Mexican DTOs and criminal organizations. Violence will follow and turf wars. So let's go into war on drugs. This is going to be a DA. Unfortunately, getting the prohibition of drugs acts is a miracle the Biden and Harris administration needs to defeat the left. The affirmative is seen through the vision of a fake victory that actually just moves the goalpost further away. Mallory wrote in 2020 that these powers will show who work tirelessly to destroy this wave of unrest before it's a tsunami that they cannot control. The goal cannot be for less public police violence. We must demand no more police violence in social movements. The goalpost gets moved to create fake victories. We've done this for too long. That's why voting negative is really important. Negating the topic doesn't mean the drug prohibition is good. It means the status quo is better than the alternatives. Voting negative is an affirmation in status quo abolition movements. These status quo radical grassroots movements can create transformational changes. Akbar demands like defunding the police reminds me that we're interested in building more just world. Demand for reform is insufficient tool. Social transformation, bottom-up reforms who demands to divest and dismantle, ensure that no one is disposable. This is really important. They are attacking the war on drugs, which is simply a mechanism used by structures in the United States to oppress Black folks. The difference is that while they may be solving a mechanism that is going to shift, the only thing that works is actually changing the system. The momentum is now. If we do this, it's going to create a fake win that allows us which basically like sedates these movements. And that's really, really bad for actual structural change, which is why divesting and dismantling police are key to solve structural racism. As Fernandez wrote in 2020, that by shrinking their massive budgets, we can help end decades of racially driven social control and aggression, as well as address social problems at the root instead of investing in an institution that further oppresses and terrorizes communities. It's a pretty clear neg ballot.
Can I get a speech doc? And also,
Yeah.
On your first response, there wasn't a trigger warning on that, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. My mic was off. What did you ask?
On the first response on cartels, there wasn't a trigger warning on that, right? I didn't miss
No.
it in Google form. Okay, cool.
All right, the speech doc's been sent.
Cool. We'll start prep when we get it. Okay, I just got it. I'll start prep when I get on the call with Ada. I'll give a thumbs up when it goes through. Hold on, sorry, the call isn't going through. I'll probably just call her instead of FaceTiming. Okay, it went through. I'm starting now. Okay, that was like 20 seconds of prep. Is everyone ready? It's going to be one off and then responding to the disclosure theory shell and then content.
So to clarify,
Everyone ready?
To clarify, it's a whole. I should get a new sheet of paper, correct?
Yeah.
Cool.
Everyone ready? Cool. My time will start now. Interpretation. Debater should verbally warn all judges, participants, and observers before reading their triggering argument. In this case, it's human trafficking. Debaters must also provide a means of contact for people in the round to be allowed to privately and anonymously opt out without being forced to do so properly. The violation, they read a human trafficking turn on our cartel's argument. Here are the standards. First is safety. Debaters cannot participate in rounds if they have been triggered and their safety has been compromised. Allowing debaters the option to opt out or mentally prepare themselves before the round prevents further trauma. Being forced to come forward publicly about your experience rather than opting out privately can make trauma for survivors worse. Second is inclusion. Reading triggering material pushes survivors of abuse out of debate. That keeps the people most affected by these issues out of the discussion. Forcing debaters to come forward with their trauma publicly risks stigma, and the fear of facing stigma can push survivors out of debate, even if trigger warnings are being read without an anonymous opt-out. There are three voters. First is safety, because it comes before debate, because debate is fake. Nothing happens when we affirm and negate, but we can prevent serious mental harm from future rounds. It's a prereq to education or fairness or anything else portable in the round. But second is education, because it's the only portable skill from the event. It's impossible if debaters are in unsafe environments in the round. Fairness is also a voter, because we make arguments so that they can be fairly evaluated. Endangering the safety of debaters in rounds and pushing people out of the debate is no longer fair. Drop the debater for two reasons. First, wins and losses determine the direction of the event to set a precedent. But second, dropping the argument doesn't solve, because once a triggering argument has been read without warning, it hinders the participant's ability to debate the entire round. Theory comes first before any case arguments, because in this case, the ability to debate the round has been compromised. Triggering case arguments cannot be legitimately responded to. No RVIs, because this shell is a check against abuse. By allowing RVIs, you prevent debaters from checking back against abuse, and triggering arguments can just be read without a fear of check back. Let's talk about their disclose shell. Here are the problems with the standards, right? It's taken out entirely by the fact that when you disclose, bigger schools and people with private coaches can just go back into the wiki and prep out. Small schools can't do this because they don't have the private coaching, right? They have bigger schools and private coaches have the resources to go back and prep out, while smaller schools don't. But even if you don't buy that, we have conclusive evidence that they took their race cape off of the wiki on the AF side. We saw it on the wiki before. We have the screenshots to prove, and it's not there anymore. Also, we're breaking news. So even if you buy the entire shell, it's pointless, because we're not even debating anything that we've disclosed yet. At that point, they have no reason to extend the shell through, and it makes no sense. We can also talk about content, because like at the end of the day, if both of the shells go down, that's what the round is going to come down to. Disregard the trafficking term, but even if you wanted to extend it, we'd argue that even if trafficking increased, that it just triggers back into that like negative feedback loop of that profit going into guns and going back into drug trafficking. That's what we tell you in case, but they only read one really big dissat about abolitionism. And when you vote on our second contention, and when you vote neg, you like solve all abolitionism, because right now we're turning towards that. But we'd argue that our way happens way faster, way on the time frame, because like they never tell you when abolitionism happens. But even if you buy the entire argument, we'd say record expungement happens immediately as soon as you affirm, which means all of these people are getting their freedom as soon as you vote AF. On their case, they're like political capital argument makes no sense. Manchin already said that he wasn't going to vote. He wasn't going to vote for the Build Back Better bill. That's a huge problem because it takes out their whole case. DS21 tells Manchin said he's a no on the bill, ending negotiations, and their whole case relies on it. But their second impact also makes no sense because even if you buy that, their evidence just said it increased the grants maximum by $550. That doesn't mean they're always going to give $550 more. And the rest of the evidence is from the status quo, like the 38% of wages evidence. So don't vote on that. And we can outweigh off of racism, off of RC2, because it links into racism much easier and with a much more broad impact. 1 in 4 can't vote right now, and you solve that as soon as you vote AF. If you're voting on racism, you're always going to vote AF.
Hey, can you send the shell?
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's sent.
All right, we'll let you know when we get it. All right, are you good for cross?
Yeah.
What defines something that is triggering? What makes something triggering?
I mean, anything that causes trauma in general should be triggering, right? And we'd argue human trafficking is one of the most traumatizing events a person can go through.
Okay, so let's talk about your case then. You read things about racial justice, you read things about mass incarceration, you read things about cartels and violence. Why are any of those things not considered triggering?
Because first, our shell is unique to human trafficking, but second, everyone
Why?
on this
No,
topic.
wait, none of your arguments are specific to human trafficking.
Hold on. Second, you also read racism and other impacts related to that. So we
and we
argue
don't read trigger warning theory.
Yeah, but we read it because you talked about human trafficking, which is much different than structural racism, because we'd argue that human trafficking is
Why? Wait. We need to dig into this. Why is the word human trafficking more triggering than any of the arguments that you read, and what is the bright line for something that makes something triggering? Because none of your shell is specific to human trafficking. It's specific to trigger warnings.
No, the problem is, if anyone else on this topic was reading a trigger warning on violence or incarceration, we do the same. But we also hit you guys 4 rounds ago, and you also didn't run a trigger warning when you read the same impacts.
This is okay. If you introduce an interpretation into the debate round, this is about setting norms. So I'm asking why your norm and your interpretation, which you cannot change, is just that debaters should read trigger warnings when you give no bright line for what is triggering or why specifically human trafficking.
We don't have to give you a bright line. All we have to tell you is that
you absolutely do. Or it's infinite. Wait, no, hold on. No, I'm gonna talk really quick. It's infinitely regressive. There is no way that you can say everyone has to read a trigger warning theory unless you are submitting a content form for every argument that you yourself are introducing.
I don't think that's true, because none of our arguments are as triggering as human trafficking.
That is
do we really need to have the debate about whether or not human trafficking is as triggering as structural racism, which you read in your case 4 rounds against us?
We absolutely should have that conversation, because
I think that it makes no sense that if you didn't read a trigger warning when you ran the same argument on us, that we should have to read one later.
I think it's incredibly hypocritical to introduce arguments that can be perceived to be traumatic, because you don't send a content warning form before the round, before you even know what we're going to read. So clearly you don't think that
Why would I send a content warning about what you're going to read?
I'm going to continue talking really quick. I'm going to continue talking. You don't think that structural violence is triggering. You also just said that it's not as triggering as human trafficking. I'm going to continue to speak if you could just let me finish. So I'm just wondering what the bright line is and why is human trafficking more triggering than issues of structural violence? This is a really important conversation.
2 minutes answering the question.
No, you just keep saying it is. Do we
No,
have
I
to
tell you
debate
that
it?
it's
That was your
uniquely
response.
worse. First, we don't read structural violence. Second, you read the same arguments against us, and you didn't read a trigger warning. And third, we'd argue that human trafficking is more like traumatizing because it involves
That is
actual
regressive
violence.
and creates a race to the bottom. That's cross.
We
We're gonna
did
take
not
some
read
prep.
structural violence. Okay.
Okay, we have 11 seconds of prep left, which isn't much, but use what you got. So it's going to be our disclosure shell, then to their off. I'm going to read a counter enter, but most of the voters are also directly responding to their specific voters, if that makes any sense. Everybody good? Okay, I'll start time on my first word. On disclosure, remember, enter. Debaters competing in varsity divisions at TOCB tournaments must disclose all previously read evidence in case on the 2021-2022 NDCA public forum wiki following the debate in which it was read. This is a voter because, one, it increases advanced strategical thinking. All they tell you is it doesn't, but we give you specific literature. Karimi tells you that the conversion thinking you do pre-round, in which you're able to target specific issues, which only acts with disclosure is, but actually boosts education. That's really good because it boosts the quality of the debates, while the back half can solve back for things like spontaneity. This is important specifically for debates that have structural violence, because you're able to increase the quality of the argument, which boosts the type of discourse they talk about. Second, on decreasing the inequity gap. We tell you that right now, private big schools, prep groups, and all of that already have the resources because they don't have disclosure. The moment you mandate all forms of disclosure after the round in which it was read, there sets a baseline in which any school can actually access the resources. All they tell you is the bigger schools will be able to prep it out more. I would argue that's incredibly non-unique at the point in which the bigger schools are already prepping it out. It's only an hour where you actually set a positive baseline in which every small school has a chance to prep out. Once again, this is even more important for the discussions about social injustice, because otherwise you're just going to see small schools constantly losing to arguments about structural framing and never going to be incentivized to actually read them, which means we're never going to have any form of discount. All they tell you else is that we took out case off the wiki. You can check back for that. That simply isn't true. And then they say it's breaking new, but remember, it's about the precedent. Just because they broke new in this round doesn't mean they shouldn't disclose anything else they've read in the past, meaning at the end of the day, you're looking at education because that increases the quality of discourse. That's what we take away from debate, and on fairness, simply because it sets a baseline which makes people actually want to be in debate. But specifically on their argument about trigger warning, counter interp, we tell you our interpretation is that debaters should only have to read a trigger warning if the team indicates the trigger before the debate on their wiki. This is so much better because you not all have to focus on opting out in the round. You're able to focus on things out of round, which makes it substantially less triggering at the point in which it also incentivizes disclosure, which prevents for a lot of the in-round abuse they talk about, meaning that disclosure serves as a prerequisite in which we saw back. But specifically, I would tell you start without On safety, start without defense. No link. Trigger warnings are infinitely regrettable because there is no bright line for what is triggering. That is clear specifically in this round. They tell you we need trigger warning on human trafficking, yet they don't read one on cartels. They don't read one on the war on drugs. They tell you that 1 out of every 4 black men in America has been incarcerated and hasn't simply been able to vote. That affects 1 out of every 4 people. That is extremely important. That's an egregious violation at the point in which they don't set a bright line. You can't have a race to the bottom. You can't tell which issues are even more important. You can drop that for that on safety on their own voter, but specifically on inclusion. We would tell you that there's no impact because Al Curious is non-graphic and just mentions the words they criticize academically in favor of trigger warnings only in the context of graphic vivid descriptions that we don't do, meaning that they're not even hitting the criteria in which trigger warning should be valid. Specifically, though, I would argue that they're worse on inclusion once again because commodification, opting out by trigger warning sets a terrible precedent for privileged debaters to opt out of important discussions about race, gender, etc. That's really important because when they do it in round with the opt-out, people can just opt out. But if you have it in an hour in which you put it on the wiki, then you know that people are more just about it because then they can actually prepare for the debate, meaning that we increase inclusion and make equity better in the debate space. At the point in which they aren't winning any of their voters, in which they just make it less equitable and don't set any form of baseline, and they set really bad norms, you're preferring our argument and disclosure because it solves back without making anything worse.
Can you just send the counter interp text?
I'll send that right now. Do you want the voter kind of things I read, or do you just want the
No, I caught those. I just want the exact counter interp text.
Thank you.
We'll start prep as soon as that comes through, if that's okay.
Okay, I just sent it. Let me know once everybody has received it.
I meant for the trigger warning counter interp.
Oh, hold up. Sorry, I might have just blanked out and sent the wrong thing. I will send it right now. That's completely my bad. Okay, I just sent the right one. Sorry about the mishap.
All right, I just got it. We have 55 seconds of prep left, and I'm starting that now.
Okay, I think that was 45 seconds. Okay, I'm gonna start on the shells and then get to their case and then our case for the substance debate. I'll start my time now. Let's start on their disclosure shell. There's one key problem with this, and this is that they took their shell off the wiki right before this round. We have screenshots to prove it. Don't let this go unextended throughout the round. It's really important that they're not even prioritizing and implementing the things that they say they claim are so important. You can't increase what we tell you is that also when you disclose on the wiki, big schools and private coaches prep out these cases ahead of time, which means they're still like moving up in the ranks. It's not like they're not like just suddenly any inequity goes away. Like private coaching is not just specific to prep outs. It's also about drills and many things beyond that. You're not solving this just by disclosing your case on the wiki. Onto our shell. Well, like let's point out that like ours is also about observers. It's not just specific to debaters. This round is being live streamed. If you want to keep people in debate like you say you do, then you're not going to push them away by bringing up triggering subject without a trigger warning. Also, you must give people a reason to like an option to anonymously opt out. Asking them to disclose their own triggering past on the wiki can be a very violent experience for victims and survivors, especially of human trafficking. Like we can't just like ask people to publicly out themselves based on their trauma. That makes no sense. Then on their first contention, we look at like this point about Manchin. This is what their whole case relies on the substance side. We already tell you the specific piece of evidence that says he says no on the bill. Their whole case falls. He doesn't even want to support this. Even if you buy their side, they can't quantify the like chance that this bill is actually going to pass. Insofar as that, like you can't even guarantee that this is even going to happen. It should not be evaluated over our arguments. And also on their impact, this funding of like $550 million, there's no guarantee that like all of it goes to what they say they do, or like this funding even happens at all. Then on our second contention about the war on drugs, we really want to like bring up this point that like they literally try to tell you this is more triggering or as triggering as human trafficking, but then run both on both sides like without a trigger warning in all of the rounds. We've debated against them before. They literally ran this content without a trigger warning, so clearly they don't really think it's as important as human trafficking or as important as they say it is. Our shell helps introduce norms of safety. Like we put out one widely run shell on human trafficking because it has uniquely been a problem in the debate space. Don't let hypocrisy take you to the ballot. This is also why we've never run human trafficking without a trigger warning in any of our cases ever. On our war on drugs, we're specifically telling you that it targets minorities. They're uniquely 4 times more likely to get arrested on drug charges than white people. They say this is like extremely traumatic, which is why it's like we should prioritize solving it immediately. We tell you that on the time frame solvency, this happens as soon as you legalize all drugs. This is because arrests go down on expungement. This means that like it's taken off their record. They no longer are being limited in their careers, their educational opportunities, housing, etc. This means that you're prioritizing racial injustice. 1/4 of African Americans can't vote because they're in prison. This means there's no people of color represented in our government right now. We cannot let this stand. Are you guys ready for Grant?
Yeah. Can I have first question, please?
Yeah, of course.
Let's take debate out of it for a second, because I'm genuinely curious. What is the baseline for when you need a trigger warning? Because I know you spent the last 30 seconds of your speech saying that the war on drugs and not being able to vote is extremely traumatic, yet you do not read a trigger warning.
I say that you guys say in response to our like shell that like this problem is equally as traumatic as human trafficking. And I'm saying if you buy into this basis, we're like, first of all, I don't think we should be like comparing different people's trauma just on principle. But I think that like in this situation, if you're claiming that this is like something that's super traumatic for like a lot of people, then that is why you need to immediately solve the issue so that it can't affect future generations, right? Like you want to solve the problem systemically, which like you bringing up human trafficking doesn't even do this. So like that's where our comparison is. It's not like we're trying to say that like human trafficking is the only form of trauma. We're saying that in the debate space, it's been like a uniquely bad problem, which is why the shell exists at all.
Okay, I guess I'm confused because you're saying
Your audio just cut out for me. I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm confused because I know you say that you don't want to compare different types of trauma, but by requiring a trigger warning for one argument and then not requiring it for the other, does that not automatically form a delineation between what you think is more traumatic or less? And doesn't first cross prove that as well?
But if you would let me answer your question, what we would tell you is that because you've run this argument against us, we can tell you that like obviously running this argument against you is not something that you like find triggering, or at least like you were comfortable enough to run it against us that like we were okay with bringing that up.
I just think that is though such a poor form of delineation. Arguments vary. It's not just like saying the war on drugs is
not about
a streamlined process though.
But our point is that it's not about like which trauma is worse. It's about like you guys bringing up both kinds of these like both forms of like racial injustice, which like I think a lot of us would agree that like discourse on racial justice is really important to solving the problem. You guys have an entire K on that. But then like also bringing up human trafficking for you didn't even gain you any offense. And second, like it just like is unnecessary to bring up. You could use other language to like get around that, right? You could have just said like people are more likely to be taken into the United States. Like you don't have to use that specific wording. That's why we're trying to avoid bringing up topics like this, because we want to prioritize safety in the debate space over like triggering people. You say that one of your priorities is like people going away from debate because they feel like they're like not given equal opportunities, but then you like also are driving people away when they can't like participate because they're too triggered.
Yeah, I know. I agree with you 100% that we shouldn't be delineating between different types of structural violence. Yet I'm just like genuinely curious though, what is the baseline? But I guess that's time. We're gonna run the last 11 seconds of prep.
All right, it's going to start on disclosure, then move to trigger warning theory. All right. Is anybody not ready?
Give me 1 second. My flow
Sure.
is matching up.
Sure.
All right, I'm good.
All right. Extend disclosure. Interpretation of the violate. Debaters and committee of varsity divisions at TUC tournaments must disclose all previously read evidence in case on the 2021-2022 NDCA public forum following the debate in which was read. They have fundamentally dropped both of our voters. These are going to outweigh for a couple of reasons. The first is on strategic thinking. We tell you that only in disclosure do we have actual nuance and third and fourth line tested arguments. We give you specific educational literature that shows that convergent thinking, which happens when you disclose, is much better than divergent thinking, and also that on the spot thinking happens in the second half, but it's a lot better. That's going to outweigh because education is the only thing we take away from the activity. It's a portable skill and happens in the real world. Then we are also going to outweigh on the inequality gap. This is really key to accessibility. We tell you that big prep outs are inevitable from big schools. However, disclosure sets a baseline that allows smaller schools to do the same thing. They just continue to accept the same responses through ink without providing warranty or any new responses. Don't let them do second final focus spin. The only thing they say is that they're breaking new, so the harms haven't happened. But they literally have never disclosed on the wiki once, which means that the harms continue to happen. Theory is not just personal; it's about setting norms in the debate space. They have violated this harm throughout the tournament and other tournaments, and they say that we took our shell off the wiki. That's simply not true. It has been under README since August. So if you want to look at our wiki, we have not changed it. This is like it's silly. Let's go on to trigger warning theory. A couple of really big issues. They don't answer most of our shell. First of all, they don't respond to the actual interp, which is that trigger warning theories must be read or trigger warnings. Let me pull up it really quick. Teams get to read. Our interpretation is that debaters only have to read trigger warning if the teams indicate the trigger before they read the debate. This is really important. They drop most of the things. First of all, phrases like human trafficking is more triggering are inherently problematic and show that there's an issue. That first of all, on safety, there's no limit to trigger warnings or infinitely aggressive because there's no bridling for what is actually triggering. Anything can be triggering, which is why when they read things like structural violence, it's really problematic that they don't require a trigger warning for that. But second of all, on accessibility, there's literally no impact because our case is non-graphic and we only mention the words that they criticize. They say it's for observers, but if you read the word human trafficking in a disclosure of triggers, you've already committed it. It's literally impossible to win. Also, they say that disclosing on the wiki is bad. Or we would say that also you can email for saying that they should emails for triggers, and also debaters have to out themselves no matter what in a world where it's triggering. We tell you they also drop commodification, which opting out via trigger warning sets a terrible precedent for privileged debaters to opt out of important discussions. This is specific offense that they don't answer. They mishandle our shell completely. We're getting more offense, and they don't weigh it at all. They don't extend voters.
Cool. Is everyone ready? It's gonna be the shells plural, and then I guess content. Yeah. We're going to start on disclosure and then go to trigger warning. Sound good? Okay. Time will start. Now, the biggest problem with their disclosure shell is that they violated themselves when the only thing they disclose on their wiki is the fact that they read the theory, not what's actually in the theory. The second thing they do to violate this is take down their race K that we saw on the wiki before, and then they took down before this round. Those are the two biggest problems that mean they violate their own shell. So if you buy their entire final focus, you're still not voting on theory because they violate the shell themselves. That means you never even get to these standards, which they've extended the whole round. But let's talk about our trigger warning shell. They come back with a counter interp that says that we need to indicate our triggers on our wiki page. The problem that Ada points out is that observers are also watching and are also potentially triggered by these topics. At that point, the shell is basically useless because we can link in with our observer stuff and our other people who may be watching the round but aren't actually debating and aren't actually having wiki pages because they're not a part of the community. At that point, we really clearly link into our trigger warning framing. Their only response is that like there's no bright line between like structural violence and human trafficking. We are not able to judge which like of the two needs a trigger. The only reason we're not reading one is because they didn't read one when we hit them 4 rounds ago. At that point, it's really clear that human trafficking is the most triggering issue that has been read today and deserved a trigger warning, which they didn't read. We impact out to safety while they impact out to education. Debate is a game. You always need to remember that safety is the most important, which outweighs both their education and fairness impacts. At the end of the day, you're always going to prefer our safety impacts. Also, they never extend any content. So if you really want to like not evaluate any of this theory, we'd say you're clearly voting off of our war on drugs contention about how 1 in 4 people don't have the right to vote because they were previously incarcerated, but legalization solves this by expunging records. They don't extend any content, so we're winning that too. We're winning content and theory. It's a clear AF.
Good round, guys.
Good round.
Sorry that it got so messy.
Okay, can I get a link to Marist Wiki from Marist and the name that like the disclosure argument is on? And then Durham, if you have screenshots of the wiki with the apparent arguments taken off, I would like those two in the email chain.
Yeah, sure. We have their wiki downloaded, and there was an argument on there that's not on there anymore.
Okay, just like, do you mean like you have a screenshot or you have like an internet archive?
We have like a file and like comparing it to like the Marist like wiki.
What do you mean you have a file?
Like
of the wiki?
Yeah.
Okay, send me that.
Okay.
I can send the link to the wiki if you'd like. I have it up already.
Oh, I just
wanted it from Marist because they said it was listed under a certain name and I didn't catch that, so I wanted the spelling to be correct.
Yes, I just sent the link and then I put disclosure and readme as the tabs that you should look at for the theory stuff.
Wait, that's the app page, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I just sent the file that was off of the wiki when we started the round.
Is this the whole file of like the wiki?
No, this is just a specific file that wasn't on there, the app section.
Okay.
And we don't have a file for the shell because it wasn't there before the round.
Like it just was never there.
Okay, that's not what I asked for.
Okay.
I guess the file that they sent, you would compare it with illicit drugs affirmative V1 that is on our app page.
All right, I have the decision in. When everyone's back, I'll go. Okay, congrats to all debaters for making it this far. That said, yeah, I should probably snap more. I forget to do that when we're making these decisions. That said, it is a 3-0 decision for Marist on the neg. Does anyone want to go first? Personally, I need to grab water.
I can, to give you some
Thanks.
time. So I voted neg. It says Ned on my ballot. I'll fix that later. So disclosure is, I think, an inherent good in the debate community, and I don't understand why it's even like a discussion that we're having. I'm new to PF relatively. This is like my 2nd year versus my 7 years in policy. And so this sort of like cultural shift and the idea that disclosure is not something you need to do especially when I came from a small school, both in high school and as college, is something I will never understand and refuse to hear arguments against, just like straight up. I do think that Marist possibly should have read some sort of trigger warning. However, I think trigger warning is a form of disclosure, and they have those arguments on their wiki. So you could have emailed, assuming you read the thing that says read me, and it would have been okay. Another thing is, like, I do think it is admittedly a little weird that they have their disclosure theory shell on the AF. I'm going to chalk that up to, like, it just got posted on the wrong side of the wiki. It's happened to me a couple times. However, the interpretation that they read is under the README on both sides. And the file that you sent me, as far as I'm aware, those arguments are on the wiki. So I'm not really sure what you're trying to do here. And I don't know if it helps you in any way. Another thing is, I believe that, like, so originally I did think for at least one speech that I was going to be voting AF, because I do think that when you break a new AF, you don't have to disclose that until after the round. Same for like new negative arguments. However, the fact that you apparently don't have a school wiki at all means that's become a moot point, because no team is able to prep against any of your arguments. And especially when a lot of schools will utilize similar arguments or like different evidence, being able to prep against that and prepare is still necessary. I do agree with the negative. There's no bright line for trigger warning, which means that it becomes infinitely regressive. Any interpretation does need a bright line. I do think that, like, it is possible to be triggered by literally anything. Unfortunately, any person can be traumatized by any experience, and anything can be attached to that experience. However, trigger warnings are used to sort of like guard against the, like, not most common, so to speak, but the ones that we can like reasonably understand can be found as triggering, which can include disenfranchisement. The idea that there is like no person watching or no person in the round who personally has like a family member who is currently incarcerated and disenfranchised, and maybe who they can't see because of their disenfranchisement due to being like caught with drugs on them, is not triggering, is like something I find a little questionable, especially when you're bringing in the observer's argument. Another thing is sort of, I think that both teams should stay away from talking about things that have happened in previous rounds. Us as judges really weren't there. I can see sometimes why this can be a little bit like ethos-y, and I can see a few specific instances where it can be good, but like, I don't know whether you hit each other, and frankly, I really don't give a shit. And so attempting to be like, well, we hit you earlier and it was fine, is like not the A1. You should go with the original, like, all-encompassing strategy. I also think if you're going to talk about observers, you should also talk about judges. Like, most of us spend quite a lot of time prepping our paradigms. Many of us, myself included, have things that we find triggering that are included in that paradigm, saying like, please don't prep me if you read this argument. If I'm in the back of the room, metaphorical, of course, in the like the Zoom debate world, you should not read these arguments, because I won't be able to adjudicate them in a way that is like both safe for myself and fair for both teams. And so I think to cut us out of that is like questionable, and brings me to the point like, why do you care about observers and not the people who are the only people with any sort of power in the debate? Like, we're the people who give you the ballot. Of course, there is like rhetorical power, and like the power of like getting to out rounds and such, but like, we are literally the ones who decide who wins and who loses. That's the crux of my decision. I should say I didn't evaluate at all the quote-unquote substantive part of the debate, because that doesn't matter. And I don't think the AF should have spent any time on them at all. I don't think either side needs to do that. Theory is a prerequisite argument, meaning like it is a theoretical question of whether the debate should have happened, and is more of a meta question versus like the parts of the debate. And so I think wasting time talking about cartel violence when you're already in a little bit of hot water with those on the trigger warning argument is like not the final nail in the coffin, but certainly is something that puts pause on an additionally unlikely affirmative ballot.
That definitely makes sense. Thank you.
I can go next. Like, honestly, pretty much everything that they said is exactly like most of what I was going to say. But to like expand in a few places, I think that like just one, like on the substance issue, like I just think that the fact that y'all are still trying to go like pull this Hail Mary on substance is like a lot of the reason why you can't pull ahead on either of the theory shells, because there's a lot of things that are just being undercovered and underwarranted on the theory shells. And so if you absolutely just kicked theory, which like none of us were going to evaluate anyway, probably at all, like then you would have had more time to like kind of like respond to the specificity of like the counter interpretation or respond to like other parts of the shell that like were pretty damning to your argument. I think the other thing, like, so I'll just kind of like read some of the stuff I wrote. I think that like on the disclosure, like, yeah, everything Marist like reads is disclosed. And like the only like that's the only response that y'all extend on the shell in Final Focus. And insofar as that is the only response there, if I see it's disclosed, like I'm gonna go for it. And I also think that like there were like maybe other responses that y'all should have been extending that would have been better, like in the off chance that this is disclosed, right? Because also like they're pretty bold in their assumption that like in their like claim that they are in fact disclosed. And I don't think that if they weren't, like, you know, they'd be like so gung-ho about like, go look at my wiki, it's up there, right? So like I think that that should have been kind of like a signal to you that like maybe that is not the best argument that we should be trying to go for. Like we should be trying to go somewhere else with this. On the content warning theory, I think that like honestly like this just gets messy. Like I don't know if there is enough time for us to like evaluate like two actually well in-depth theory debates in a PF round. Like even if you did drop substance, I still think that there's like an undercoverage issue, like that there would still be an undercoverage issue just because there isn't enough time. I think that the introduction of this like as a shell, as opposed to like maybe even just some kind of like, you know, like theoretical like paragraph, like I don't know. I think that it's just a giant time suck that like then means that like we're not able to like get as much warranting in there. So it just makes the debate really messy, honestly, to evaluate for us as judges too, because there's just a bunch of like flying blips and unwarranted claims flying around that I'm supposed to like figure out where to flow. I think lastly on the trigger warning theory, like I will just say that like I think that there's a lot of good research out there that says that like this is about graphic language, like that graphic language is what warrants a trigger warning theory, like warrants a trigger warning. I think that like, yes, Marist like could have more on one, but at the same time, like I do think that their argument is true that this is like infinitely regressive at some point. Like you don't like give a bright line as to like what needs to be trigger warned. I like agree that there's probably a lot of good evidence and like good reason to believe that like arguments about racism and whatnot are probably triggering to people of color and whatnot. And so I just think that like I just don't know that you're getting offense there. Like I don't know.
Yeah, I'm kind of with everything that's been said. I think you're spreading yourself too thin. And I also think that you're kind of just approaching these debates like it obviously, you know, it's a little bit new to PF, but it's not this big scary monster. You still have to do a lot of the things that you would do in any debate. And I just don't think that you are doing that in this debate as much. So like still doing line by line, you know, going for answering individual arguments rather than going for big picture arguments, I think are important in these debates, which I think quite frankly just lead to, in this debate specifically, the way I viewed is that there are just simply arguments that are dropped, that you're letting Marist get away with a lot that I don't know if they necessarily should. And I think a lot of that does have to do with kind of going with case, especially on the content warning theory. I think that there are some arguments that, although they're kind of like not well developed from Marist, I think they're just quite frankly dropped arguments that give them a lot of leeway. So like even if I don't think that, you know, it is infinitely aggressive, which I do, I think there are two other pretty good arguments that Marist brings up about how, you know, it's non-graphic and that doesn't link into impacts, as well as the fact that like it would allow them to co-opt, or like privileged debaters to co-opt out, that I think I could be pretty compelled to, you know, vote on defense for that, and then go to disclosure and end up voting for Marist there as well. So I just think that instead of kind of like going for these bigger picture arguments, making sure that you still are doing everything you need to, and both teams, you know, weighing, like you have these two theory debates, weighing them, the arguments within them against each other, those are still important things that, need to happen in this round to make it a little cleaner for each side. But also kind of, I agree with everything else, to not reiterate it, but to give, I do agree with everything else that was said.
Thank you, guys. It was a good round.
Thank you so much for the feedback. Good luck, guys.